So Guy, we've got a big election coming up in the US. What does that mean to you?
Bigger government, bigger deficits, bigger tariffs.
It really is a coin toss. And anyone that tells you different is making it up.
We all hear, the newspapers, the TV, Trump versus Harris.
We won't notice until it's too late that we really have moved into a new era.
I think that's a real risk. Welcome to What's Brewing. I'm Guy Miller, Chief Market Strategist and Economist at Zurich. I'm joined today by Matt Holmes, the Group's Head of Government and Political Affairs. Matt, in the next few days, apparently, there's going to be a big event, a US election. How important is it going to be for all of us?
Certainly the most important election in a year of elections, and one that we all need to watch very carefully because it will have important geopolitical consequences. Unfortunately, it's not an election that's easy to predict the outcome of at this point in time. It really is a coin toss. And anyone that tells you different is making it up or trying to swing the betting markets.
We all hear, the newspapers, the TV, Trump versus Harris, Trump 2.0. Does it really matter which one wins from a long-term perspective?
I think yes, from a policy perspective, there are key differences between the platforms. But you tell me whether you think that's going to translate into market reaction or broader macroeconomic consequences.
I think the markets are taking all this uncertainty in stride. I think the important thing really will be how does Congress shape up? Is it a divided Congress as we currently have, which markets generally like, or could we get a clean sweep by Trump, for example? How do you see that?
So I think all options are on the table, but at the moment it does look like it will be a divided Congress. And I think we can say with certainty that the level of partisan friction in US politics is not going to reduce in the short term.
The thing that gets all the headlines, of course, and we kind of know about this from both the Democrats and the Republican administrations of the past, is tariffs. Tariffs seems to be the big thing right now. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. Protectionism is back around the globe, and I think the outcome of this election is going to be critical in how we see that picture evolve.
So Matt, we spoke there about the impact of tariffs. That's going to be a key election theme. Thinking about global trade more broadly, what does this election outcome mean from your perspective on the geopolitical element and the politics of all of this?
So let's take a stat, 20%. And that's the number that we're talking about in terms of average tariff levels that President Trump is committed to at this point. So let's assume he takes that forward. You then have
And that's on both friend and foe. This is across the board.
This is across the board, right? And the last time we saw US tariffs, general tariffs, average tariffs at that level was the 1930s, almost 100 years ago. And that wasn't a pretty decade, Guy. I don't know how your history is, but I don't think we want to be going back to the 30s anytime soon. But look, I bring that up just to highlight how significant a change this is from what we've been used to in terms of trade policy over recent decades. And I think the politics there are set. Even if you have a Harris administration coming in, you're going to see continued ratcheting up of pressure on China. With Donald Trump, the key difference is this is a much more general approach, and protectionism will be here to stay. Now, from a political perspective, I think that's a key change.
Yeah.
From an economic perspective, how worried are you about that? How worried are markets about this?
Well, from what you say, I'm very worried because to me, when I hear tariff, I hear tax. 20% is effectively a tax on consumers. Whether you're a domestic consumer in the United States, you're going to be paying at least 20% more for the goods that you need or you want to have. So that's going to be a tax on consumers. It's a tax on businesses. And I would say what's important about this is that we've just come from a very high inflation period. We've just got inflation heading back towards target.
And this puts inflation right back on the table.
Absolutely. And then you speak about the 1930s. Maybe it's not like that, but there's no question. This is an additional frictional cost that is coming at a time where
economically, this hurts US consumers, potentially puts inflation back on the table in the States. What about the global economy? Is it the same implication? Is this a drag globally?
But it is. And as you say, if it's a flat tariff that's put on, for example, Europe. Europe is struggling from not only did it also have, and still does have quite high inflation, but it has very anemic growth. So again, you're putting another friction in the workings of the global trade. And we know that for the last 2-3 decades, that globalization has has been a key factor in not only bringing people out of poverty that we've spoken about in the past, but it's certainly a key factor in terms of allowing consumers to prosper, allowing businesses to prosper as well. And anything that interferes with that, I see very much as a disruptive tax on all of us.
And I think from a political perspective as well, we would do well to remember that a low tariff environment and globalization has really greased the geopolitical wheels. It's removed friction from the geopolitical system as well. And if we're putting tariffs back into the mix, we should expect to see some more sparks fly from the geopolitical engine, if you like.
So it's great rhetoric, but the reality is, from an economic perspective,
yep,
it's a problem. It's a friction.
It works well for voters, but to summarize, it's a tax and it's potentially inflationary for US
Absolutely.
consumers. So tariffs are a tax, Guy, but one thing that hasn't come up in the election so far is the question of actual tax. The fiscal debate has really been silent. Both sides promising to roll forward some, if not all, of the tax cuts that Donald Trump put in place in 2017. From an economics perspective, that must be a worry, right? Markets must be watching this.
Promises in an election campaign. Well, listen, you like numbers. So if I give you a number, $5 trillion, that's potentially what the Trump campaign are talking about in terms of fiscal initiatives coming forward, the extension of the tax cuts that we've seen, plus additional, I mean, it's on a net basis. So that is important, but the Democrats are doing something similar, not quite as large, but around about $3 trillion of additional spending. This is a time where we already have very, very high levels of debt. The fiscal situation in the US is becoming more of a concern to the financial markets. So this is important. These are both candidates speaking about more, not less spending.
So are you calling the end of a bull run in US Treasuries? Do we need to start selling off our...
Now, look, I think ultimately the US is still a very good credit. But the point is that at some point, the debt levels become an issue. And at some point, investors will say, we want some kind of premium in order to lend you money. Let me give you another number, which I think is quite staggering. It shows you how high debt levels are currently. In the United States, the carry cost of that debt in terms of annual interest payments, more is being spent on the debt payments than is being spent on defense spending. That's remarkable.
And politically, this means there is a smaller pool of funds to distribute on the things that you want to keep your voters happy.
Absolutely.
And in the current context, the focus, and it not a surprise at all, is going to be on domestic needs and domestic funding demands. So welfare or pensions if you're on the Harris side, perhaps subsidies or incentives for fossil fuels if you're Donald Trump and you're trying to reverse some of the effects of the Biden administration. That means there's less money for spending on defense, as you said. There's less money to support NATO or to support the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia. The geopolitical implications here, I think, are potentially significant, even if the broader economic impact may be limited. But are there other areas from a market perspective? Are there areas at the moment where US spending is important in determining trade flows and
well,
how things
one
work?
shouldn't forget, I mean, it's very easy to be critical about spending, but of course, it's one of the reasons why the US economy has done so well over the last number of years. If you think about the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIP Acts, I mean, this has been fiscal spending that has led the US economy to prosper quite well. It's quite the reverse in Europe. We are constrained in the case of Germany. There are constraints. There's a fiscal brake being put on. So spending is not all bad. The important thing is that, again, when it's needed, we need spending to come through. And when the economy is doing well, that's the time it should be brought back in again. The thing is, as you know better than anybody, politicians don't like pulling back spending, particularly when an election's coming up. And to me, all we're now speaking about is just bigger and bigger government. Is that how you see it from a US perspective?
I think there's no appetite to shrink government on either side, whatever the rhetoric. And unless markets are going to start calling time on US deficit, I think politicians will continue to spend that money how they want.
But you see, in the case of the United States, it's going to be, again, more focused domestically, a move away from spending on other parts of the world, for example, particularly around some of the military interventions.
I think you take a step back, this all comes back to an overarching political shift in the US, which is becoming more US first, if you like. And that's a phrase we associate, the sort of make America great again is very much a phrase that's associated with Trump. But I think if you look at the policy positions of both sides, they are increasingly focused on middle America, on American jobs, American economy, and they're looking at this through a domestic political lens. And that has important implications for geopolitics.
So this election really does matter. And from the side of things, from what you say, not only does the outcome matter, but the thing that we need to keep an eye on is what happens with Congress. Is it still a split Congress, or is it a clean sweep? Because that will ultimately determine the ease of getting big measures such as tax initiatives pushed through. So a lot to watch for in the next day or two.
Exactly. So Guy, to summarise, we're both strongly agreed this is a very important election that's coming up, even if we can't call the outcome at this point in time. And from the discussion, it sounds like both geopolitically and economically, it could be a really important pivotal moment.
I think we don't have long to wait now, Matt. So again, all attention will be on that outcome. Hopefully the next time we have a chat, we will have an outcome by then. There's certainly no shortage of things to speak about. So I hope to all our viewers and listeners, you like and subscribe, because there's certainly a lot more to discuss coming up, and hopefully you'll participate in that discussion with Matt and myself. Thank you again for tuning in.